become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure.
What are you really afraid of? Hast thou eaten of the fruit of the tree whereof I told thee thou shouldst not eat?
The moral to be drawn from this nightmare situation is a simple one.
You simply have to turn your back on a culture that has gone sterile and dead and get with the program of a living world and a re-empowerment of the imagination.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Fundamental changes in society are sometimes labeled impractical.
Our birth, our death, our being in the moment, these are mysteries. They are doorways opening on to unimaginable vistas of self-exploration.
The contemplation of death and the acceptance of death is very highly generative of creative life.
Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts.
The society is trying to cure itself by an archaic revival.
What account would we give of our stewardship of the planet Earth?
The world is not an unsolved problem for scientists or sociologists. The world is a living mystery.
I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel.
Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
Would you mind starting by telling us who you are, what your position is, and how you came to be in this role?
My name is Jesse Smith, and I'm the Director of Land Stewardship here at White Buffalo Land Trust. We're a 501c3 nonprofit here based in Santa Barbara, California. We have a mission to practice, promote, and develop systems of regenerative agriculture. And so my role is kind of in all the different threads of our organization, both out here in the land, as well as tied into our scientific research and our education and training, as well as bringing products to marketplace that represent the regeneration of land that consumers can purchase in the marketplace.
What do you believe is the modern world's relationship to death?
Well, I think that, as a society, we've come to think of death as the opposite of life, and having them be in kind of dyadic opposition. It's very much this black and white mentality, and instead of them being more opposite sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. I think that you can more accurately picture it as kind of the yin and yang. One is always nested within the other. And so I think that when we talk about agriculture and we talk about that kind of reciprocity between life and death, and how all death should and has the potential to contribute to new life, then we have a great depth of loss within our culture as to how intact we are with that understanding, and how far afield we've gone to thinking it is a synthetic addition to our systems that we can mimic kind of infinite growth in life and production. But what we've actually done is just kind of taken that death and externalized it into other communities and other parts of the world and other systems.
What led you to being interested in regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, my journey into regenerative agriculture and kind of how I consider it a framework for thinking about living systems and living landscapes through the lens of food production. I've kind of come to a point where I try to develop a better understanding of regenerative living, and agriculture is one component to that. But it definitely took a trajectory coming from a design background and a creativity mindset to one that was using that creativity and that design thinking in order to create change within a living system that had the capacity for growth and evolution. When I was in school, I focused on graphic design, graphic communication, product design, and you were always trying to mitigate harm. You're always trying to create less bad, instead of trying to create something that would perpetually evolve and get better with time. And so the concept of planned obsolescence to me was like sandpaper on your skin, to design something that's meant to break down and decay instead of designing things that are supposed to contribute to life-giving forces. And so when I moved into agricultural systems and designing them, it was through the lens of permaculture, and then through kind of keyline design and agroforestry and agroecology, and then kind of coming at it through kind of how food service and food systems integrated within community kind of led me to where I am now, which is the community in which I grew up in, where I was born and raised, where my wife was too, and our daughter is as well. And kind of having had the privilege and opportunity to travel the world and now come back makes me that much more appreciative of the kind of resources that we have available to us when we know a place intimately. When you grow up and you know the watersheds and you know the lineages of people that have come through there, and you can pay respect to all the different interconnectivity that is existing within a landscape and a watershed.
What makes regenerative agriculture special?
Yeah, I mean, I think regenerative agriculture has a unique moment in time where it's a confluence of a lot of different lineages of thought, where they've all come to a realization of the importance of the interconnectivity of all these different systems, of how our water cycles function, how our soil health is in reciprocity with human health and community health, how biodiversity and the interaction with all the component parts together can be greater than the sum of all those individual parts. And then how kind of human systems and cultural systems and spiritual systems play into how we actually produce our food and how we eat and the culture around food production. And when, all of those pieces, we kind of call them the 4 pillars of regenerative agriculture, which is soil, water, biodiversity, and the human component, when they are all integrated within one kind of approach to agricultural production through the framework of regeneration, we have the opportunity to bring everyone into the room. Everyone has a door to enter. And I think that is one of the most powerful things about regenerative agriculture, is that it's very inclusive. By its very definition, everyone is in this, and there's no place that you can be within this world where you can't be on a path to regeneration. And so even the most kind of degraded landscape with the most destructive practices and the most kind of static mental paradigm managing it can take their next best step forward. And as long as they keep doing that and they keep taking their next best step forward, they can be on a path to regeneration. So I think that that's one thing that I hold as its most powerful kind of asset, is that everyone's invited to participate. And the only way that you can be excluded is if you start to revert and go backwards. And so, there is no staying still in living systems. You're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. And so each person has their own direction, but everyone's invited to participate. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things that it has going for it.
When considering soil, why is it important for us to focus not only on sustainability, but on regeneration?
At its simplest form, self-preservation. I mean, living entities want to continue to live. And if we look at the history of humanity, every civilization that destroyed its soil destroyed itself. And I think that that's one of the most amazing things that we can take note of, and then understand where we are right now and the trajectory that we're on. And we could be the first generation that could actually reverse that trend. That we can be a part of society that systemically destroyed its soil, recognized it, reversed that trend, rebuilt soils even to potentially better than how they were before, humans were the predominant keystone species amongst them. And so when we start to dive into that and really understand all the implications of a healthy living soil system, from micronutrients in our so when you start to think about developing a deeper understanding of soil health and soil function, and then you match that with the creativity and ingenuity that humanity has come to realize within technology and biotech and all these kind of leading edge scientific research fronts, nanotechnology, space satellites, like that can all be used in service of living systems. And the appropriate application of technology with the appropriate understanding of living systems is a very, very powerful factor to consider in the potential of what we can do to be able to, salvage a living kind of ecology that can support human life. But we're slipping in the other direction, and we're seeing a lot of very adverse effects of our current management structures. So,
what is the relationship between regenerative agriculture and a technological society?
what I think was interesting is it feels like in the long-term kind of evolution of living systems and the movement onto land, the original technology in my considering is photosynthesis, and the ability to harness the power of the sun for regenerative growth. And it feels like all other technologies should be in service of how we continue to support the regeneration of life. And so I don't see any of these things as being outside of the conversation of their appropriate application, but I think that really understanding the different externalities of their use and the externalities of the harvesting of the inputs. So yeah, I think that we often think about appropriate technology and its role in agriculture and in service to living systems. And I think that regenerative agriculture provides an amazing opportunity for us to be able to harness so much of the ingenuity of humanity and apply it for the betterment of food production and fiber production and processing and preservation. But once again, really understanding core principles and creating core principles around how we want to engage with the food we eat and the clothes we wear and the medicine that we treat our families with, both where is it sourced, how is it grown, how is it processed, how is it preserved, because the externalities and ramifications of those decisions are going to be played out over generations. And I think that that's one of the most unique components of regenerative agriculture is the epigenetics and kind of genome work to understand how the way that we manage our pastures, the byproducts of the forage makeup in those pastures, the feed that is then provided to the animals that are grazing it, how does that actually change the genetic makeup of those animals over multiple generations? So are we actually breeding healthier and more vibrant animals, us included, by the way that we produce food, or are we slowly degrading our genome and our human kind of capacity to be healthy keystone species in this big world that we're in? And that to me is just completely fascinating.
Why do we need animals in agriculture? Why not exclude them and let them do their own thing?
Well, I think that when the question comes up of why do we need agriculture to incorporate animals, you have to first ask, why should agriculture mimic intact living ecosystems? Because when we try to strip out the diversity of an intact prairie or a forest system or even desert landscape that has all the different component parts, animals included, it is a healthy functioning system. When we choose one piece out of that has economic value and decide to grow that in a monocrop across a landscape, whether that be the animal in the form of intensive feedlots, or it be the corn that is grown to feed that animal in intensive feedlots, or any kind of orchard crop or whatnot, we take out all of the other pieces that are contributing to the healthy functioning system. And so animals are part of every intact ecosystem. They're part of how nutrients get cycled. They're part of how we disturb the landscape, or they disturb the landscape, and then when they leave, it's how it recovers. And so we've tried to mimic that by human intervention, whether it be plowing or tilling or deforesting. Those were byproducts of large mammals and ruminants moving through a landscape and knocking over a large amount of the biomass that is part of the nutrient cycling and the death and decay that needs to go back into feed for future life. And so when we talk about evolving our thinking around agricultural production, we then try to mimic what happens in a natural system by the planned integration of the appropriate animal, the appropriate trees, the appropriate grasses, and so on and so forth. We are never going to get it as right as nature had evolved, but that evolution took millions of years, and there was a lot of getting it wrong for nature as well. And that brings up the question, is there right or wrong, or is there just evolution? And so, I think that when we talk about the importance of animals, it can't be understated that life is everywhere at different kind of nested levels of size and scale. And so if you eat a piece of lettuce and it's covered with healthy microbes, are we considering the life and death in that interaction? Are we talking about, if you're plowing up or deforesting an intact forest in the Pacific Northwest, the fungal components, the life that's part of that, are we talking about that every time we till up a organic carrot field, that we're destroying every fungal network that was existing from the previous rains? So understanding that life is everywhere, hopefully, and it's our responsibility to continue to steward that is a big piece of how regenerative agriculture is perceived.
What do you feel are the biggest obstacles for regenerative agriculture taking hold and making a difference in the world?
So, the obstacles and barriers in regenerative agriculture are manyfold, but I think that if I was to name the top three, I would say that sometimes it feels like we're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, because agricultural systems are directly tied to financial and social systems. And even if you change things on the land, you're still having to play by the same rules in our kind of financial context. And so when you're trying to compete on a price point that is being essentially subsidized by ignoring all the externalities of conventional agriculture, it's really hard to make that case work. And so I think that that's one of the barriers, is really trying to understand where all the inherent value lies within a regenerative system of agriculture, and making sure that that is being overtly valued and brought back to the land stewards that are supporting those systems or caring for those systems, to be able to make it worth it. And I think that that's going to really alleviate some of the major kind of pitfalls of transition. I think another one is kind of human, social, cultural barriers, is that I think that there's still a huge amount of disconnect between what has transpired in our past of land ownership, and how people have acquired land, stolen land, raped and pillaged to take land, and the lack of reconciliation around that. And being able to come to grips with why certain people currently own land, and why certain people are currently devoid of or disenfranchised from access to land. And as part of regeneration of agriculture, as part of regeneration of culture, we must address the human component in that, and that's not an easy road to walk down. And I think there's a lot of kind of embedded systemic aversion to having that conversation, and until we figure out some way of really opening up that box, I don't think things are going to really move in the direction that we need them to move. And then I think the third one is that many people, we live in the kind of the scientific age, that so much of our thinking and how we perceive of the world is based off of kind of the scientific process. And I know we spoke about it earlier, but how do we reconcile some of that scientific process with the unknown of how living systems work and evolve. And I think that we find ourselves in this little bit of a conundrum where we can't say that something is valid unless it has the backing of the scientific community. And yet the scientific community currently operates in a place of kind of siloed information and narrow but deep research, whereas all the component parts of regenerative agriculture require a very broad and open-minded approach, as well as a receptivity to kind of the unknown and spiritual and universal components that may be beyond the either current conceptual capacity of humanity, or may not actually abide by the same kind of rules and restrictions that we find here on planet Earth. And so when we go into the depths of microbiology, or we start talking about the grandiose nature of planetary influences, there's still so much there that we don't quite understand yet. And so we tend to negate as part of a contributing factor in the scientific process. And I think that biodynamics has kind of shown that conflict in real time, where, you know, we have a system of agricultural production that has proven positive outcomes, and yet has not had widespread adoption on a global scale. It has been adopted and it is part of kind of our common lexicon, but it's not like everyone's doing it everywhere. Because, you know, it's really hard for certain people to understand why you pack a horn with, you know, fresh manure and then bury it in the ground and only apply, you know, certain practices during certain parts of the moon cycle, and why we grow certain plants to make, like, that seems so kind of out there and ethereal to people that it's not part of, you know, a scientific proof-driven decision-making process. But should that be something that we ignore, you know, or should we explore more, or should we do it because we know it works even though we don't know why? And I think there's still this disconnect between we must know and it must be proven for us to validate. And that I think I've kind of felt is a third big barrier for us, is being okay with not knowing, but having letting our intuition kind of still drive our process of decision making.
In your own practices on this land, how do you allow yourself to lean into your intuition?
Well, it's almost, I mean, when you think about intuition and kind of it as a guiding force, I think it's very much kind of like that gut feeling component to it. And I often have people ask around the question of, when you see a piece of land, why can't you tell me exactly what it's supposed to look like in 10 years? And I think that's it's like asking, you know, a single-celled organism exactly what it's going to be in 10 million years. It's like evolution is going to define what the final form is, or the next form is. And so too with a living landscape, you've got to have this trust that if you abide by living system principles and you engage with these systems of regenerative agriculture from a principle level, that it will evolve into a healthy, functioning ecosystem that provides for you what you need from it. But you can't predefine exactly what it's going to look like, you know, what elements are going to be there, exactly how tall the trees are going to be, or how many are there. Like, you can plan some of that, but you have to kind of use the wit and wherewithal of your human capacity to change or adapt or you know, pivot in real time. And I think that we've found ourselves in a slight disadvantage to the power of Mother Nature when we've just plowed through or pushed through and say, no, this is what I wanted, this is what I planned. There were supposed to be this many acres and this many trees and this straight line, so I'm going to, and then what happens is that nature walks back in the door and it may be tomorrow and it may be decades or centuries later, but she'll figure out a way of bringing it back to check. And I feel like that's what we're having right now, is our reckoning on a global scale of, nature is kind of bringing us back into check. It doesn't matter if it's fires or floods or, storms. There is some amazing power that we're having to recognize our systems that we've built are not equipped to be resilient in the face of. And the ones that are the ones that are more akin to the diversity, the topography, and the functional capacity of an intact living system, but from an agricultural perspective. And that takes a good amount of intuition and know-how and being in tune with your role in that system to be able to navigate as a long-term steward of these landscapes.
Is there anything about your own physical or mental health that brought you to regenerative agriculture?
I think for me, the personal health component was more aligned with kind of the essence of my being in a physical form, is that I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'6". I'm a big guy. I'm 250 pounds. And the trajectory of my work was leaning me towards being in front of a computer and a desk for the majority of my working days. I was a graphic designer. I was in front of my computer, all night, all morning, all day. And I started to see that playing out in my physical capabilities as an athlete. Trying to then go and do what I used to do as a kid felt more difficult. Yes, age is a component of that, but I also just didn't feel like I had that. And so using my design skills and my creativity within a living landscape, I love using my body to pick up, trees or logs or rocks to be able to create the infrastructure of our paths or our terraces or something like that. I love using, appropriate hand tools to, create basins or dig holes or create terraces in order to, support the living trees and the water reticulation. And there's something I think very powerful about the building of a human body around building of kind of a landscape in reciprocity. And so I think that was one of the biggest things for me, was just kind of the physical activity and strength that it takes to actually manage a landscape. And I had a young daughter on the way, and understanding that her lifelong health started with the decisions that we were going to make in her early years. And that was when we first started our farm, was the year that she was born. And having her grow up in an orchard and climbing trees and running barefoot and playing with animals, that was a major driving factor for us around how we wanted her microbiome to evolve in early years.
What do you think our long-term trajectory is as a species? Is there any way we can sustain the way we've been living?
Yeah, maybe for a while. I mean, I whenever I think about the word sustain or sustainability, I always think about long-distance runners. Is that pace sustainable? Not indefinitely. There's still an inherent assumption that you're going to have to stop at some point. And so it's really just trying to squeak out as much as you can. And that to me is sustainable. It's like, how long can we prolong this? And that's the difference to me between regeneration and sustainable, is that, are you actually creating more energy within the system by its inherent operation? And so then you can regenerate for infinite amount of time. But sustainable, you're still, coming to the conclusion that essentially it's gonna end. And another a great quote that I don't know who to attribute this to, so I apologize. But it's everything matters and nothing does. And I just love how it brings everything into perspective of we're a blip. Humans are a blip. This Earth is a blip. It's our star's gonna decay and we're gonna go with it. Humans are gonna be gone long before that. you know? So like, does any of it really matter? Like, yes, it does, because we're here now, and these are the relationships we have. And every single decision we make actually has ripples through space and time. So everything matters. So even if, you know, I stand up and walk away from this interview right now, and you guys are pissed off at me because you spend all this time coming out here, that energy is going to ripple on for an infinite amount of time. And that's past any humans being on planet Earth, or there even being a planet Earth, because energy is ever present, and it's just going to continue to move from one place to the other. And so I try to live by that principle of like, leave positive energy everywhere you go, and also recognize that it really doesn't matter because you're only here for a small amount of time, you know. And so it's like I try to live one day at a time, you know, live it beautifully, you know, exude positive energy, and then pass it on to the next generation, you know, once you're gone.
What would you like people to understand about regeneration?
What I would say is people need to know that this is possible everywhere. You know, is that you have some capacity within your community to make a difference. You have, you know, someone who's doing some really good work that you can support. There is always a better choice out there that you can figure out how to make. You know, we're really excited in this community to be doing the work that we're doing. We're obviously in early years. You know, we're starting here with this flagship farm, 12 acres. We're working with some great partners at the local university, as well as a lot of the ag universities around California on some great research projects focused on everything from organic cotton to organic and regeneratively produced almonds in the Central Valley, to some dry farmed grain production in the high desert. And then we're really excited about the Halama Canyon Ranch capital campaign that is coming to fruition. We're planning on launching a regional center for regenerative agriculture on a 1,000-acre working ranch at the kind of pinnacle of California, up near Point Conception. And so that's a big one for us, to be able to invite all the different stakeholders within our community to the table, to be able to engage around a piece of land and create our own new story of place here in Santa Barbara, California.